Hello YouTube. I'll get straight to the point. In 1908, the Tunguska phenomenon took place. It was a very significant event in the history of our planet. And if the object actually hit the Russian taiga or boreal forest, instead of being destroyed in the sky, the consequences would have been catastrophic worldwide. Please see my video. The link is in the description to this one. Well, 39 years go by, 1947 now. The mysterious Sikhote-Alin meteorite strikes the Russian Far East. I'm about to tell you more about this event. So we started with 1908, which is the Tunguska. Now 1947, Sikhote-Alin. Let me add this, 39 years pass again, and comes 1986, when the Dalnygorsk object falls, so to say, into the Russian Far Eastern city of Dalnygorsk. See my video on the subject, also you'll find the link. So what's going to happen in 2025? 39 years after the 1986 case. Who knows? What is the significance of the number 39 in all of this? I don't know. Who knows? Maybe it's still a coincidence. Maybe it's not, and if not, I hope Vladimir Putin and his scientists and the military understand that something grave and dangerous may be coming to the sky of Russia's Far East in 2025, and maybe not only to Russia. China is right next door. They have good scientists too. Also, I want you to know that there are curious details about an important expedition that visited that area of Sikhote-Alin in 1907, and also I've heard rumors of a UFO crash in that area in 1956. So let's begin by traveling back to 1947, a very memorable year in the history of global ufology. As we know, by the way, the history and the secrets of the fall of the Sikhote-Alin meteorite 75 years ago, counting from 2022. Well, there was a huge iron meteorite that fell in the Sikhote-Alin mountains. It shattered into thousands of fragments in the atmosphere. And it was February 12, 1947, near the village of Beitsuha in the Ussuri Taiga, and in the Sikhote-Alin mountains of the Far East. And some of the information I'll repeat through the presentation, but I kind of want my audience to fully understand what happened, because I'm still not sure what exactly disintegrated, let's say, over the taiga. So the fall of the Sikhote-Alin meteorite actually devastated the taiga. Huge cedar trees were smashed or uprooted, the snow was compacted, about 30 craters were formed during the fall, and meteorite fragments were found in one of these craters. Of course, such a phenomenon could not go unnoticed by local residents. So there was a resident in the city of Iman, now Dalnyrechensк, Russia. And he was the artist Medvedev, who witnessed the fall of the Sikhote-Alin meteorite while painting a picture for portrait with local landscape, and so he captured it. And we'll speak more about it. Fragmented in the atmosphere, it fell like iron rain on the area of 35 square kilometers. So this is the number I have here. The meteorite left behind altogether more than 100 craters with a diameter up to 28 meters and a depth of up to 6 meters. That's one source of information. And lots of debris. The total mass of the fallen matter, according to astronomers, was about 70 tons. 27 tons were collected, more than 3,500 fragments. The largest of them weighs 1,745 kilograms. The Sikhote-Alin meteorite has entered the top 10 largest meteorites in the world, and now samples of the Sikhote-Alin meteorite are presented in all more or less large museums of the world. Soviet astronomer Nikolai Divari described the fall as follows. At the very beginning, the bolide was seen in the form of a relatively small rocky body moving rapidly across the sky at some angle to the horizon. The size and brightness of this object increased until a critical moment in its movement came. Object flashed with a blinding bright light, broke into pieces, and leaving behind a fiery tail, continued to rapidly approach the Earth's surface. At this stage, the fall of the bolide was a fascinating picture, which is extremely rare for a person to be able to see. Describing a large arc across the sky, while the fireball flew, scattering golden sparks on the sides and all the time splitting in the air. With sounds similar to an artillery firefight, the meteorite fragments hit the ground, causing a small earthquake. There's a small issue with the sounds, and I'll explain to it later in this presentation. Windows rattled in apartments, the glass fell out, plaster fell, snow flew off the roofs of the houses. The trace left behind by a flying meteorite in the sky finally dissipated only in the evening hours. Here's some more description. It's a very interesting event, and you get some different numbers and observations. So it was an ordinary morning when, in the courtyard of his house in the city of Iman, in the Primorsky Krai, or Maritime Province, the artist Pyotr Medvedev was finishing work on another landscape. It was freezing outside, and since he had to work with his bare hands, Medvedev was already getting ready to go home when he suddenly heard a barely discernible low-frequency hum. He told in his memoirs exactly what happened in those minutes and what the consequences were. Medvedev turned his head in the direction of the growing noise and saw how the cloudless sky in that direction was quickly turning an unusual red-brown color. Just a few moments later, a fireball appeared from a bright yellow flash in the sky, and with a loud howl swept across the sky from north to south, leaving behind a dense, smoky trail. A few seconds later, it disappeared behind the hills on the horizon, and after a while there was a deafening cannonade from the other side, and the frozen ground trembled under his feet. Medvedev, who by the age of 27 had managed to fight in Japan, that was during World War II, just right after when the Soviet Union and Japan were fighting. Anyway, he closely followed world news, so he decided that this is the end, that the Americans began to use nuclear bombs against the Soviet Union. But the artist made a mistake. On that morning of February 12th at 10:38 a.m. time, the Soviet Primorye, or Maritime Province, was bombarded by one of the largest meteorites in history. A 70-ton iron bolide entered the Earth's atmosphere, exploded in the air, and collapsed into thousands of fragments, falling in a meteor shower on the western spurs of the Sikhote-Alin Ridge in the taiga near the village of Beitsuhe. It was impossible not to notice the fall of the meteorite. Residents of the surrounding villages were seriously alarmed by an unusual celestial phenomenon. After the explosion, window panes were broken in many houses. Entrance doors almost flew off their hinges. In some cases, wood-burning stoves were skewed and the plaster inside the premises was damaged. A dense column of red-brown smoke lingered in the cloudless sky for several more hours. The descriptions mention the iron meteor shower. The first report from the site about the passage of an unidentified flying object and the subsequent explosion caused surprise to employees of state security agencies, that's the KGB, and representatives of local authorities. The city of Khabarovsk geologists, who were promptly consulted, suggested that it could be a meteorite, but they could not give guarantees. The incident was immediately reported to the USSR Academy of Sciences, which requested additional information. Well, just 3 days after the incident, pilots of the Far Eastern Geological Department, returning from another mission to their base in Khabarovsk, reported to their superiors about the discovery in the remote taiga of many unusual spots of fallen forest and holes in the ground, similar to craters from a meteorite fall. Less than a week later, a small single plane single-engine airplane landed 3 geologists on a forest clearing near the specified coordinates, and from there they began a grueling 3-day journey to the place of the alleged fall. At the same time, Fyodor Shipulin, who headed the geology department of the Far Eastern branch of the USSR Academy of Sciences in Vladivostok, he went on a hunt for the meteorite. He took the train to Burlit station on his own, where he persuaded 2 local hunters, trappers, to keep him company in further research. Having traveled more than 60 kilometers through the snow-covered forest on skis and snowshoes, on February 24, 1947, Shipulin and his companions went to the place of the meteorite fall just a few hours later than the Khabarovsk residence. The researchers saw a striking picture of the consequences of the disaster. In an area of several square kilometers, trees were partly felled and partly stripped of all branches and bark. The tops of the pines were completely cut off. Everything around was littered with fragments of branches and armfuls of cedar or pine needles. The snow with the earth and wood debris was compacted so much that it easily withstood the weight of an adult. There were small craters along the piles of broken trees and upturned earth. The largest was more than 28 meters in diameter, with a depth of 8 meters. Numerous jagged meteorite fragments were scattered around the craters, and the untouched snow was covered with the smallest particles of meteorite dust. The geologists counted offhand more than 30 large craters, drawing up a planned diagram of their location. According to the memoirs of one of the participants of that first expedition, the crash site resembled an artillery range. Individual craters were located so densely as if a large caliber battery fired a volley at that place. After spending several days at the crash site, carefully recording everything they saw and taking with them several meteorite samples found in the small craters, the geologists returned to Khabarovsk. The collected data allowed them to conclude that a large meteorite weighing several dozens of tons, exploded over Sikhote Alin and poured molten iron rain on the ground. The fall of celestial bodies of this size is a rare phenomenon. At that time, no more than 10 such cases were known worldwide. Because of its exclusivity, the Soviet Far Eastern meteorite was given a personal name, the Sikhote Alin Iron Meteor Shower. Another local resident, Kornei Shvets, described his impressions as follows: I saw blue flames sparkling in the sky as the meteorite was burning, and the fire was visible after the main body. The windows of the bakery where I worked with my mother and brother trembled. The oven door swung open and several hot coals fell to the floor. Then I was only 17 years old and I was very scared. We thought it was the explosion of an American atomic bomb because it happened shortly after the Americans dropped the bomb on Hiroshima. Eyewitnesses also reported that windows flew out in the houses and plaster fell on the floor. The gradually winding smoke trail was visible in the sky until evening. The animals were very scared of the meteorite. Cows were mooing, horses were trying to break loose from their leash, and the dogs were barking, trying to hide or escape into the forest. Now, that's important to remember, by the way, about the animals, and I'll tell you why later. The crash site was discovered by the pilots on the second day. From the air, snow-free craters were clearly visible, around which fallen and broken trees were lying. By February 24, 12 days after the fall, a group of Soviet geologists arrived in the area. It was they who collected the first eyewitness accounts. I already mentioned that. From the ground, the devastated taiga made a stronger impression than from an airplane. The area of destruction reached several square kilometers. Many trees were broken into pieces. Some of them hung on the surviving crowns. The trunks of some trees resembled a telegraph pole, as their tops and branches had been cut off. Deep snow mixed with clay and wood debris, and it was so compacted again that it could withstand human weight. The largest of the many craters was 8 meters deep and reached 28 meters in diameter. According to the memoirs of one of the geologists, the area looked again as if a large caliber artillery battery had passed through it with dense fire. The resemblance to an artillery raid was reinforced by multiple shrapnel damage to the forest. Fragments got stuck in trees and some even pierced through half-meter trunks. Some fragments were of a spiral shape, which is why geologists concluded that at the time of the fall, the temperature of the meteorite mass was about 300 degrees. The USSR Academy of Sciences comes into play. As soon as the news of the fall of this large meteorite in the Far East was absolutely confirmed by the special order of the Council of Ministers of the USSR, the entire area was immediately declared a nature reserve and transferred for comprehensive study to the full disposal of the USSR Academy of Sciences. You gotta keep in mind, this is 1947. The Soviet Union was laying in ruins after World War II. There was hunger, actually, in the Soviet Union. Times were very tough. Stalin had other headaches. The Cold War was about to start. And all of a sudden an immediate reaction is very interesting. Very interesting. In my books and lectures, I mentioned that in 1949, Beria, the chief of secret police under Stalin, sent a special military expedition whose findings are still classified to the site of the Tunguska phenomenon, which is not that far away if you think about it. But that's another story. I'm sure it may be interconnected. Anyway, in early April, a special commission, an expedition led by the authoritative astronomer Vasily Fesenkov, who headed the newly created Committee on Meteorites, arrived in Vladivostok. Together with him, an experienced researcher, Yevgeny Krinov, arrived in the Far East, who by that time had managed to take part in an expedition to the site of the mysterious Tunguska meteorite. So that was before 1947. As well came also several employees of the Institute of Astronomy and Physics of the Academy of Sciences of the Kazakh Soviet Socialist Republic. Geologists of the Far Eastern branch of the Russian Academy of Sciences joined the group on the spot. Large meteorites at the site of the Sikhote-Alin meteor shower. Well, let's look at it. At the end of April, scientists set up a field camp in the area of the fall and began a detailed survey of the entire area where the meteor shower fell. Fragments of the meteorite were searched for with the help of special magnetic resonance devices and even ordinary magnets. The parts of the meteorite were mixed with clay and looked indistinguishable from the fragments of rocks and stones scattered around everywhere in abundance. Small fragments could be found right in the bushes and last year's grass on the surface of the earth. One of the large ones was found almost by accident when the expedition was curtailed. All this time it was literally lying in the middle of the camp and dozens of people walked on it every day. The smallest fragment in the form of a drop of molten metal weighing 0.18 grams was found lying neatly on an untouched piece of paper. After lengthy mathematical calculations, academician Fesenkov suggested that the meteorite came from the asteroid belt located between the orbits of Mars and Jupiter and entered the Earth's atmosphere on a catching up trajectory at speed of about 14 kilometers per second. The initial weight of the celestial body was about 1,000 tons, but most of it burned and sprayed on the way to the surface, so that only a core weighing 70 to 100 tons reached the Earth. In the denser lower layers of the atmosphere, subjected to extreme heating, the core continued to split and experienced at least 2 explosions at an altitude of 25 and 6 kilometers, falling out in the form of hundreds of thousands of fragments on the area of 20 square kilometers. The fragments of the body collected by the researchers made it possible to illustrate the whole picture of the evolution of the meteorite in the Earth's atmosphere. The parts that broke off at the first stage of the fall had obvious traces of melting, with the formation of a beautiful wavy crust of a gray-purple hue, characteristic of other iron meteorites. Other pieces showed a less pronounced regmaglyptic relief, the so-called characteristic depressions on the surface of meteorites formed as a result of the thermal and abrasive action of the Earth's atmosphere. In places, they retained sharp broken edges and a typical meteorite structure. Such fragments without heat treatment very quickly rusted and collapsed. The parts that broke off at the last stage of the fall did not contain traces of the passage of the atmosphere at all, and almost completely preserved the original internal crystal structure of the celestial body, which was of the greatest interest to scientists. Chemical analysis of these fragments allowed scientists to determine the composition of the Sikhote-Alin meteorite. It consists of 93% iron, 5.9% nickel, 0.38 cobalt, and small impurities of sulfur, phosphorus, carbon, and chlorine. This referred it to the type of coarse-structured octahedra of chemical group 2b. Further research showed that the meteorite was as if welded from disparate iron elements, the gaps between which were filled with rare minerals. It was this structure that caused such an easy destruction of the meteorite in the air. The first expedition collected a huge amount of data about the meteorite and the scenario of its fall, and in addition found the photonegative of the smoke column taken in the first minute after the fall by one of the amateur photographers from the mine. On the instruction of Fesenkov, the expedition also acquired from the artist Medvedev his painting depicting the disaster. Now, it's in the Museum of the Committee of Meteorites of the Russian Academy of Sciences. But most importantly, the first expedition of the Academy of Sciences launched the subsequent detailed scientific research of the Sikhote-Alin iron meteor shower. Over the next 3 decades, the Meteorite Committee organized 15 expeditions to Sikhote-Alin. Their participants carefully mapped the area using aerial photography, described the crash site in detail, counting 24 craters with a diameter of more than 9 meters, 98 craters with a diameter of 0.5 to 9 meters, and 78 holes with a diameter of less than 0.5 meters, and collected a total of several thousand meteorite fragments with a total mass of about 30 tons, including the largest single meteorite weighing 1,745 kilograms. Residents of several cities and dozens of villages within the radius of 300 kilometers from the scene witnessed the unusual phenomenon. No other meteorite became a model for the artist like that one. The Sikhote-Alin meteorite is inferior in fame except to the famous Tunguska and Chelyabinsk, despite the fact that the fall of the latter in 2013 was recorded by dozens of automobile video recorders and thousands of eyewitnesses, and resulted in a whole line of regional souvenirs and t-shirts with inscriptions, "I survived the Chelyabinsk meteorite." Someday I'll tell you more about the Chelyabinsk meteorite. There is a whole story to it too. Well, pure iron meteorites like Sikhote-Alin are rare and never differ in large sizes. According to scientists, a good half of all the knowledge about the iron meteorites that modern science has was obtained during the research of the Sikhote-Alin fragments. It launched the scientific career of many Soviet astronomers. At least 3 monographs and several dozen scientific articles were published based on the result of studying that meteorite. The meteorite left its mark not only in science, but also in geographical names. The small village of Beitsuhe, near which the Sikhote-Alin meteorite fell, received the logical name Meteorite. Its namesakes were also 2 streams flowing at the site of the fall. Now they're called the Big and the Small Meteorite. In addition, in 1957, the USSR Post Office issued a stamp with the same painting by Pyotr Medvedev depicting that fall. The Sikhote-Alin meteorite really became a record holder among the other famous celestial bodies that visited our planet. Even a minimal estimate of its mass makes it possible to include in the top 10 largest meteorites in the world. A generous gift from space was, as I said, distributed to well-known museums around the world, while a huge number of samples settled in private hands. There's a whole market for that. With the advent of the perestroika policies of Gorbachev, restructuring of the USSR, and coming of freedom, dozens of seekers armed with shovels and metal detectors were drawn to the taiga, picking up lost pieces for scientists and for profit. They still appear, those pieces, on online auctions and are in high demand among buyers. This is facilitated by a widespread, according to some, superstition that claims that pieces of that meteorite can have positive effect on the health of its owners and bring them unprecedented luck. How these superstitions came to be, or what people call as superstitions, I do not know. And finally, despite careful study, the meteorite still holds many mysteries. For example, almost no noticeable traces of temperature exposure were found at the crash site, unlike the famous Tunguska meteorite, after which there were fires and even melting of rocks. Scientists still continue to argue about the origin of the Sikhote-Alin meteorite. Some consider it part of an asteroid that collapsed more than 350 million years ago. Others claim that this and similar iron meteorites are completely independent celestial bodies formed 4.5 billion years ago from matter that was not useful for the formation of planets in the solar system. The Sikhote-Alin meteorite was not the first and not the last space visitor to come to the Russian Far East. It is known about at least 14 more cases of falling celestial bodies of different sizes in the Far Eastern regions. So something attracts them to that area. I will not list them. Those who are interested will contact me. Anyway, in the summer of 1907, under the flag of the Russian Geographical Society, with funds released by the local governor general, an expedition was undertaken to explore the mountainous region from the Terney Bay to the north along the coast of the sea, the Sikhote-Alin Ridge and the Bikin River. To me, it has a special meaning because my father spent part of his Soviet military service in that area as well, in the mid to later 1950s. He told me a lot about the area. And my mother loved the books written by the expedition leader, as many Russians do, by the fearless Vladimir Arseniev. Well, let me tell you about him. The expedition was headed, from the description, by a man physically strong. His height, 174 centimeters, weight 72 kilograms, broad shoulders, strong neck, narrow waist, chest forward, large muscles on the arms, biceps, muscular legs, found muscles, thin hands, long mobile fingers, sharp eyesight. The scar on his back was from anthrax. On the left hand, not far from the wrist, there was a tattoo, Mura, 1896. It was the staff captain Vladimir Arseniev. The material of the expedition formed the basis of his famous book, Dersu Uzala. The detachment consisted of 9 Siberian sharpshooters, a botanist by the last name of Desulavi, there was a student from Kiev University, there was the assistant and his brother, and the Dersu Uzala guide was there too. A month later, one of the brothers and the Sulavi returned back, and Arseniev was left in command by himself. On the 22nd of June 1907, the detachment, taking gifts for the local population, including beads, buttons, saws, axes, and so forth, they arrived in the Bay of Jigit, on the destroyers Terrible and Merciless, from where the expedition moved deep into the taiga. The expedition took place in a constant struggle with the elements, landslides, quicksand, floods, one following the other. It was scary to look at the river. The fast-moving water made my head spin. It seemed that the shore was moving in the opposite direction with the same speed. The forest giants, washed away in their roots, fell into the river, dragging blocks of earth and young animals growing on them to get with them. Immediately, this windfall was picked up by the weather and carried away. Like an enraged beast, the river was rushing in its banks. The water rushed madly through the valley. That's what he wrote down, Arseniev. In addition to the elements, they had to literally fight with the inhabitants of the taiga itself. The most terrible beasts in the taiga were, according to Arseniev's definition, human beings. The Chinese hunhus, bandits, escaped convicts too. Making my way through the thicket of the forest, I saw a small clearing, and there was something white on it. At first I thought it was hammocks, but already from the faces of my companions I realized that it was something more serious. As I got closer, I saw human skulls. There were 6 of them. There were other bones lying on by the sides. 6 skeletons. How did these people die? The harsh taiga keeps such secrets. There Sue found out that the dead people were Koreans. They were gold diggers. The trees bordering the clearing, these silent witnesses of the death of 6 people, they stood in silence, and now the taiga seemed even more gloomy to me. That's what Arseniev wrote down again. In 2007, there was a magazine that undertook an anniversary expedition to the place where Arseniev found the bones of the gold diggers. The forest thickens, closes over our heads. The sun no longer breaks through the thickness of the foliage. One of the travelers recalled, at times it begins to seem that if you leave behind you on your own, you may not get out of the taiga anymore. But the new travelers did not reach the place they wanted to. Snowmobiles stalled in the loose snow. We had to do a path in front of them, trying the ice with bipods, jumping over gullies, pulling out failed cars. Everyone except the naive people who were used to everything cursed everything in their hearts. 10 days later, the vehicles, burans, all-terrain, began to run out of gasoline. First we abandoned the sled, then the snowmobiles themselves. Well, 100 years before that, the Arseniev's companions also could not stand it. They had rheumatism. Then the second brother, Mezlyakov, left the expedition. Arseniev completed his last route in October-December with only a part of the sharpshooters group and the guide, Dirsul Uzala. Arseniev actually was lost, as they saw it on the mainland, and by the order of the governor, the general governor, a rescue expedition was organized, which set out on December 25 from the Vladivostok. 5 days later, 2 detachments met in a small Udege village on the Dikin River. Despite all the difficulties like hunger, the onslaught of the winter cold without warm clothes, left in a boat that was carried away by the storm, the 1907 expedition, which lasted 7 months, fulfilled the entire planned program. The rivers and mountains of the coastal strip of the maritime province, Primoria, with a total length of up to 400 verst or miles, were explored. At the same time, the explorer made 16 side routes towards Sikhota-Alin. In total, the expedition overcame more than 1,000 miles along the eastern slopes of Sikhota-Alin, collecting information on colonization, ethnography, the economic situation of the local population, its customs, trade, history, and military topography. During the expedition, Arseniev carried out archaeological excavations of ancient fortifications in the area between Ternay Bay and Plastun. The found objects were transferred to the Khabarovsk Museum and to the ethnographic department of the Russian Museum. An exhibition of Arseniev's collections was organized in the Russian Museum, where the traveler was personally introduced to the Russian Emperor Nicholas II. However, Arseniev was ordered to remove from the exhibition all skulls, bones, and all objects related to the cult of burial, because Nicholas II could not stand any mention of death. And now, let's go to the missing documents. The fate of the expedition participants was also quite different. Dersu Uzala was killed by convicts, escaped convicts, in 1908 because of his rifle. Many of the soldiers and Cossacks who were on that trip, they died in the First World War. Arseniev himself, at the beginning of 1930, as head of the Bureau of Economic Service of the new railways, went to the lower reaches of the Amur River to inspect expeditionary detachments, and then he got a cold and died on his return to Vladivostok in September. Look, he had experienced problems with the Soviet communist regime. They didn't like him, and he was not trusted by them. The Desaluvi was teaching French in the Khabarovsk Cadet Corps. After the takeover of the area by the Soviets, as a Swiss citizen, he left for China, where he died in 1933. The collection of plants he had transferred to the Khabarovsk Museum of Local Lore, collected in 1907, was subsequently lost. But in the year 2000, during the repair of the museum, a number of the lost sheets were actually rediscovered. See, documents kept getting lost, and not all of them were rediscovered. Look at this. Part of the Arseniev's records of 1907 have not been found so far. Arseniev's so-called Green Book disappeared. He kept important records concerning the finds of precious ore, caves of death, places rich in ginseng, and a map of a plantation of 22 ginseng roots given to him by Dersu Uzala. The map was cut through by red arrows, instructions on where to reach the secret grove. Arseniev marked the place where the ginseng grew with a red square. I think there was a little more than just the precious ginseng in those maps and those documents and his writings. Arseniev gave the copied map to Mirzlyakov, one of the brothers, who died in July of 1947 in Vladivostok, taking the secret with him. Again, 1947. Arseniev's book, Dersu Uzala, with explanatory notes by the author, it disappeared from the library of the Geographical Society. This is highly unusual. To me, it looks like someone definitely did not want the most important information to be made public. I suspect the expedition organizers, who possessed incredible knowledge and interest in the area, they knew something. What I'm trying to find out if they knew that 40 years later a celestial guest was coming to the area. Maybe they had this precise date. Who were they? This is interesting. The famous Japanese film director Akira Kurosawa remembered Arseniev and his expedition of 1907 with kind words all his life. Trying to get out of the crisis with a failed motion picture and suicide attempt, Kurosawa turned to nature and Arseniev's book Dersu Uzala, which he read as a child. Repeated acquaintance with the book led him to the idea of creating a motion picture based on the materials of the expedition. Kurosawa carried out his plan, and in 1975 his film Dersu Uzala was released, which received an Oscar in 1976. Look, if you can see this film, please do. I don't think you will be sorry. It's an incredible story about very brave people. I do have more videos about Dersu Uzala and Arseniev, the serpents, for example, of Siberia, Russian Far East. You can find it in my channel. Anyway, there is information about an alien spaceship that sank in the lake in that area in the fall of 1956. Fishermen reported the discovery of many details of unknown origin. Look, I checked, but it's very hard to substantiate the rumors. this area, you can't get too much out of it. There was a Sikhote-Alin meteorite. Archaeological artifacts prove that people lived on the shores of the lake back in the Stone, Bronze, and Iron Ages, but no proof that UFOs flew here. And yet there is more to the mystery of the meteorite. But before I get to that, I kind of wanted to also find out more about those ancient fortifications that Arsenian found. And there is more to the ancient civilizations in that part of the world, vanished ones. And I'll talk about it someday in the future, but I think it's all interconnected in some way. Well, let's look at some more mysteries of the meteorite, and it has to do with modern science. Now, I'm referring to the work done by the Russian scientist Konstantin Khazanovich. He's a bright man. Here's briefly what he stated. The fall of the Iron Rain on February 12, 1947 is the main event in the field of meteorites of the 20th century. The Tunguska catastrophe, despite the fact that it was a much larger cosmogenic event, is in no way comparable to the Sikhote-Alin. Of course, researchers of the Tunguska meteorite failed to find a single, even the smallest fragment of the space visitor, while their colleagues in the Ussuri Taiga collected more than 37 tons of meteorites during the meteor fever period of 1947 to 1950 and 1967 to 1975. So he refers to the Sikhote-Alin meteorite. Also, unlike the Tunguska catastrophe, the research of which began almost 20 years after the event, the Sikhote-Alin meteor shower began to be studied almost immediately after its fall. This circumstance is especially important for this type of information, which is the testimony of the local population who still had fresh memories of the observed event. Such a survey was conducted by a group of researchers headed by Divari, whom I already mentioned, in the spring of 1947. The testimony of about 300 eyewitnesses from 38 localities was received. As is well known, flights of large bolides are accompanied by electrophonic phenomena, sounds of an electromagnetic nature, not acoustic. In the above description, as in the entire book by Krinov titled Iron Rain, nothing is said about these sounds, and the reader gets the impression that the flight of the Sikhote-Alin body was not accompanied by such phenomena. But the reality was different. In the most difficult situation was Krinov himself, who actually at the age of 13 observed an electrophonic bolide. Here's how he described this phenomenon. 1919, April 7, in the morning, Tambov region, Morshansky Uyezd. A greenish yellow bolide was flying from the south to the east at an altitude of 15 to 20 degrees at an angle of 10-15 degrees to the horizon. Synchronously with the acceleration of the bolide, a dry crackling was heard, like a burning splinter or a dry fir tree. After 30 to 45 seconds, 2 or 3 blows were heard. Krinov kept his secret, so to say, for 63 years. Testimony of eyewitnesses about the abnormal sounds during the passage of the Sikhote-Alin alien object. He perfectly understood what was being discussed, but he was silent because, so to say, he had a family and he was worried. And Khazanovich says, these are the ways of new ideas in science. Meanwhile, Grebennikov in 1984, who compiled a catalog of electrophone fireballs in Siberia, the Urals, and the Far East, noted that many eyewitnesses of the flight of the Tunguska and the Sikhote-Alin meteorites heard various sounds synchronous with their movement. He marked them, but for some reason did not include them in his catalog. And in the later catalog of electrophonic bolides compiled by Bronstein, the same Grebennikov and Rabunsky scientists, in 1988, these bolides were not even mentioned in a single word. The well-known astronomer did not say one word about the electrophone phenomena accompanying the flight of the Sikhote-Alin bolide. So, were there or were there no electrophone phenomena during the flight of the Sikhote-Alin bolide? Yes, but it looks like there was a cover-up not to report them. Hazanovich wrote that familiarity with the testimonies of eyewitnesses given in the book leaves the impression that no one questioned them when collecting information, and their written testimony was not clarified. Without such an assumption, it is difficult to explain why most of the testimony given in the Divari's book contains such substandard information. It was the same with the reports of strange animal behavior during the event, but some of the influential leadership of the Committee on Meteorites of the Soviet Academy of Sciences and the Academy of Sciences apparently did not believe in the existence of electrophone phenomena. Guided by the well-known scientific principle, this cannot be because it cannot be. In conclusion, it remains only to make a confident deduction concerning the restless behavior of animals when the Sikhote-Alin bolide appeared. The animals once again warned us by their behavior about the impending danger. Unfortunately, neither their owners nor the scientists from the Academy of Sciences who arrived at the scene could understand this. As you can see, it is a mysterious case, and I am not sure how much we will learn about the objects that arrived in Russian Asia in 1908, 1947, 1986, and most likely will arrive in 2025. I've been studying meteorites, so to say, from afar, not maybe as close as I want to, but I do know a little bit also about very interesting finds in southern Africa. Also amazing in itself, but the Sikhote-Alin object was unique, whatever it was. I appreciate your attention to my work, and if you can support my research, you will find the links in the description to this video. Please tell others about my channel. Thank you.